So.
Sick after eating brownies, and the brownies were laced with marijuana.
We have enough for quorum anyway, since I came out in the cold and rain.
Good, we're just...
You know, if there are death threats, people need to be honest.
Curious.
We're just talking about you.
Have we started?
Not without you.
Not without you. Exactly.
He was getting
My
ready.
babysitter was very late, so I apologize.
Mike was getting ready to call you.
That's my problem.
I'm gonna lock the doors.
Don't look great. Two at home. One's around
So yeah, I had
How old's the youngest one?
10.
kids,
You gotta have a babysitter.
teachers on that day of
These are
voting,
all,
so I didn't come in to see,
just
I
things.
came in.
Things, okay.
yeah.
Not tonight's agenda, thank goodness.
Well, planning board bylaws, that's informational, that's
Oh, yeah,
informational.
it's
This
even more-
relates
that's right.
directly
It's even
to
more reason
Kids
not
coming
to
in
trust me.
skateboarding. It seemed like
impacts.
every
This is the
two
zoning ordinance, and this is the
there must have been
subdivision.
close to
Okay.
one,
Just for reference.
Thank you very much.
like 25% at least were called.
So does anyone else need an agenda, because we have extras? Pat needs
Last
one, yeah.
national election, I think we had 1,250.
I have the extras.
How you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
They're driving up Massachusetts plates into the voting. That's why they don't want, well, plus they don't show up on it, let in there.
Revised one or something, or?
That's what I'm saying. If they care enough to come up, let them come up.
Maybe the legislature will change the law this year.
Don't get in their party and keep
But it
supporting us.
was
Okay.
health related, but we're good with.
But maybe the
alternates, so.
legislature with all the numbers, now we can change it.
All right. So,
It's already drafted.
before I start, oh, I see, okay. Thank you.
Now we can officially
Now we can
begin.
start. All right. Now that the candy's been dispersed, it still feels like Halloween. It is 6:31 by the town clock. I'm John Krugerberg, and I'll call the November 4th, 2010 Plymouth Planning Board work session to order. Present here are Mike Ahern, the vice chair, John Ranlett, Rhonda Bishop, Paul Wilston, the selectmen's representative, Charles Berman, alternate Bob Dragon, alternate Pat Roach, and I don't think and of course our town planner, Sharon Penny is here. Absent is Bert Sutcliffe and our alternate John Kelly, and the selectmen's alternate Darrell Brown. At this point, place in the agenda, we have a space for public comments. If there are any comments from anyone in the audience who would like to make a statement or ask a question or address any issue that is not on tonight's agenda, you're welcome to do so now. Okay, moving on. We have administrative matters. I'll ask the town planner to address those, please.
We have, I emailed everyone, and I hope I faxed you, Bob. If I don't, I have another copy.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much.
The time I remember what I'm doing, but the rest of the time I don't. We have the draft minutes of September 16th to approve. I would like to make one correction given to me by Mr. Wilson, that he was in fact not absent, but he joined us at 6:55. So I've got that slated to be changed to the record.
Okay. Those are minutes that we'll approve at our next meeting, is that correct? Or are these minutes that we approved in the past and just skipped?
No, these were just sent out there from the
The
September 16th.
ones that you just sent out, okay. Okay, well, that's not on the agenda to approve, so we'll
We
make
don't
that.
necessarily do that at
no.
workshops then?
Right, so-
Okay.
so
All right,
we'll
no, that's
do
fine.
that at our
We'll
next
save it
meeting.
for later.
Any other administrative matters? Okay. Item 5 is correspondence. I guess this would be the place to point out that to the board's loss, Jack Scarborough has resigned from the planning board, and we have a letter of record for that. Is there any other correspondence? Okay, moving on to item number 6. We have several committees that have to be determined for representatives, and part of that is because of Mr. Scarborough's absence. And as you know, he played quite a significant role on a lot of the environmental issues with respect to water. So moving down the line, we have 9 potential reports. Does Select Member Berman have a Board of Select report? Well, how about we'll come back to you if we need to at the end of these. Mr. Wilson for the Conservation Commission?
Yeah, just one item. On October 16th, we had a group of volunteers from Plymouth State University who volunteered to help out the Conservation Commission do a day of clearing trails, and we worked on the Plymouth Mountain Trail, vastly improving the trail by opening up, clearing brush, remarking it, and so forth, and making it more usable, more user-friendly than it was in the past. So we extend our thanks to a couple of faculty members and to 8 students who participated on a cold Saturday to clear the trail.
Thank you. Very nice. Any planner Penny for the ZBA?
We had one case, which was October 5th. It was a variance preceding a special exception for a 2-family housing extension on Keble Street, and the variance was denied, so the subsequent special exception was moot. And that's basically it on that.
Okay, thank you. Oh,
May I have a agenda? I was so generous that I shorted myself.
they work their ways that way.
And Mr. Chair, I wasn't quite sure if these committees were still standing, if they'd sunsetted or what, but I picked it up in Miriam's notes from before, so that's why I put it on the agenda this time.
Okay. Ms. Bishop?
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report. That was from the is it
PVS.
Pemmy Valley? Or Plymouth Village?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure which PV it was. Water and Sewer District Source Protection Committee. And then we have several to be determined. So it sounds like Mr. Ahern has some insight here.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was nominated to the governor for the Pemmichwaset River Local Advisory Committee, and shortly after that, for personal reasons, I asked to get off of it. But I still am on the email list, so I can give probably a small report.
Wonderful.
They're working on a new management plan for the Pemmichwaset River. The advisory committee is working on it. They put together a survey that I guess will be going out to either property owners within the watershed or have land on the river. I'm not sure which. This week there was also an email that went around to over 100 people looking for I think 3 individuals that would be willing to serve on a governor's committee to review the regulations that are in place now, give input, and I guess they're looking to update the river regulations. So that's my report.
Thank you. Are you interested in continuing to give us these sort of updates, or actively attending, or just virtually emailing?
Maybe when January hits, I can start to go to the meetings.
Okay.
So you can put my name on there.
All right. We have 2 Newfound Lake Region committee liaisons, one for their watershed steering committee and one for just the general Newfound Lake Region Association.
I can speak to the association a little bit. I think you and I had discussed this, Mr. Chair. There's a planning effort afoot with some consultants through a grant process to look at the planning regulations for the towns that border Newfound Lake. And we do by a wee little bit. They've had 2 meetings thus far. I wasn't able to make the second one. But the emphasis is basically on helping the planning boards, if the towns desire, try to come up with additional zoning ordinances that might be applicable to the towns. Even though Plymouth doesn't have a huge area in the watershed, we do have some. And one of the work products that was going to come out of this effort eventually, either this year or next, would be for some steep slopes ordinances. So I'm kind of putting my finger in the pie on that, keeping it on the pulse, not to mix metaphors, but I think that watershed health is very important, and we're very lucky to have such a wonderful watershed, so I'm going to try to keep everyone apprised of that.
Some of that information might also be useful for the other bodies of water that are in Plymouth,
Absolutely.
whether it's Loon Lake or the rivers.
Absolutely.
Are you attending these meetings then, and you can give updates then? All right. We have one other absence here, the Plymouth Regional Emergency Management Committee. By chance, is there anybody who's been getting the emails or otherwise participating with that? So then we have 2 committees that if anybody has some interest in, we could use some liaisons to the Newfound Lake Region Watershed Steering Committee and to the Plymouth Regional Emergency Management Committee.
I know that the town is actively involved right now in putting together emergency procedures and plans, different sections of it. Would that be what this committee was? I don't know, Charlie, do you know?
There's a lot of activity. The police and fire, I think there were, how many people, 16?
Quite a few, yeah.
Mexico, a week of training on this. Emergency management, Homeland Security runs these courses. And I've talked to a couple of the,
You might want to bring your microphone down to a little bit there.
I talked to a couple of people that went to it. They were impressed that one of the teachers was the head, he was the head police officer in Oklahoma City when the bombing took place. And it's because of the campus, there's a lot of concern. Homeland Security has concerns about any university, any community that has a campus involved, to keep the first responders up to speed. And a major issue is protecting the first responders, because they get drawn into these when there's some sort of a emergency, and they, I guess one of the objectives of the terrorist is to suck them into the environment and then set it off while they're there. So it's a long series of certifications. I guess Paul Freitas, the emergency management coordinator in town, he's certified up to like level 5. This was a level 1 certification at Homeland Security's, I guess you'd call it the University of Terrorism or whatever in New Mexico. But we do have an emergency management plan that the Board of Selectmen has been sent, and we've been asked to read it, and so that we're aware of what's in it, broadly. And it's a fairly extensive, probably 15, 20 pages or more. Other than that, I say it's an ongoing, there's a lot of stuff going on that is funded by Homeland Security. I think we got close to the $372,000 in grants at the last board meeting from Homeland Security. most of which went to the, it was for highway department use. So we signed off on almost, it was just under $400,000, 3 grants at the meeting before the last one. It was all Homeland Security. There was one 372,000, one was 10, and I think the other one was 5,000. So,
Well, maybe in the next 2 weeks, the town planner can see if Select Member Berman's knowledge of this committee will suffice. And I think also maybe speak with Mr. Kelly, because I think he's expressed some interest about some of these issues, at least in terms of some of the
Mr. Kelly?
wildfire. Yes. Mr. Roach, if at any time you hear a committee that you would love to jump onto, we would welcome your participation.
Safely in the audience.
And that's not to exclude you, Mr. Dragon. I know that you know that. Select Member Berman, is there anything else from the Select Board that you'd like to share with us?
I'm not too sure anything significant. We've had our regular meetings. And I say that the major issue was the last meeting, I think it was, we got it was $400,000 worth of grants. But other than that, it's pretty much routine.
Okay, excellent. The last report from committees actually lands in the planner's lap. Do you have any reports?
Just a couple of small updates. We did sign off several weeks ago on the development agreement for the CVS store. And I hear the pharmacy, and I hear rumblings from their construction folks. So hopefully we'll be having a pre-construction meeting on that soon. I'm not sure what the time frame is at all. I'm not sure if the facility is, or the building is something that could be constructed because there's no foundation, no basement level foundation could be constructed during the winter possibly.
When you say rumblings, do you mean sort of a negative
No,
nature?
no,
Okay.
just,
Some stirrings.
yeah. They were contacting the building inspector. No, that would be grumblings, I think.
Okay.
It would be.
Where you, the tractors and earth movers are actually
Right.
making their own.
Also, everyone's probably noticed that there's been a lot of construction work on Tenny Mountain Highway to install the infrastructure for the signals at Boulder Point, and Tractor Supply will be before this board at our meeting on the 18th. They did submit their application for subdivision, which is a minor subdivision of the parcel into 2, and then site plan review for Tractor Supply. So that'll be exciting to see those 2 things come.
While you're on that topic, do you want to just remind everybody, including the audience watching, what that sort of timeline is for that being completed, and what happens to the light in front of the driveway entrance to Walmart? Does anything happen to it?
You mean Boulder Point?
No?
Oh, both? Well, they're going to be, there's, I believe it's 30 days or so, where they're on blink just to assimilate the traffic patterns and get it all synced up and queued up. So when the second light, or the Tractor Supply light, comes into town, it's actually being held up because they have to custom build, fabricate the mast arm for the light itself, so they're kind of on hold with that. So
we shouldn't be alarmed to see the blinking lights?
no,
Okay.
blinking lights are never a bad thing. That just means usually slow down and pay attention, so,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Excuse me, but just for further clarification, there still will be 2 lights, is that correct? And will the connector between Boulder Point and Walmart be opened up at that time?
I don't know if it'll be opened up at that time. I know that we went through this quite a bit this summer, that there were quite a few contingencies, which you folks obviously would be aware of, with Walmart to that effect. And Tractor Supply is aware of it, but I'm not exactly sure what the time frame is. Everything has to kind of fall into place. But ultimately, that was
It is
the plan.
the long-term plan.
Yes.
Selectmember Berman?
We've been told by DOT, I guess that fabrication of the light pole is 6 to 8 weeks, but once the light is in, they're supposed to open that
Is it
connection.
immediate? Okay.
Walmart is really pushing to get that done.
Okay. Thank you.
So, be new traffic pattern.
But I don't think you'll see it by Christmas. 'Cause
Okay.
I don't think that pole will be ready until after the first of the year.
All right. Any other reports?
I saw some information out there as far as the Better Buildings Program, which is the energy initiative, which the town was one of 3 awarded these monies in the state, along with Berlin and Nashua, that the Office of Energy and Planning is actually advertising for basically a site manager for all 3 towns/cities. So that looks to be something that's progressing along. Other than that, nothing of any consequence.
Okay, thank you. The 7th item on our agenda is new business, and there are 2 things of new business. One is a discussion of impact fees and off-site development /rotaries, and discussion of potential zoning amendments for the town meeting warrant 2011. So as we go into impact fees, we established a subcommittee of the board, and those people, I believe, are prepared to make some sort of reports, and so we can have a discussion about that. And I don't know if the subcommittee elected sort of a chair, but maybe the members can say something to that.
Well, not really, because Mr. Scarborough was kind of the lead on that, so we're missing a little something. I mean, what I did by way of trying to get everybody on the same page again, and you have that information there, Mr. Chair, is to get copies of our impact fee as it exists in the zoning ordinance, and also as it exists with subdivision, to see what we've got there that we have to abide by. The question, I think, as we mentioned before, is coming down to the specifics, the formula of how to implement, when, how. The how begets the why, and the why begets to whom. So we had the 2 areas. We had commercial development, and we also had some residential aspects of residential development. I think it's important to see that off-site improvements and impact fees, they're kind of the same but different. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in the normal course of development, you do have some off-site impacts that, kind of the normal mitigation, but when it comes into the level of impact, which would be where it more approximates impact fees, like major changes in the transportation system or water and sewer or something like that, then that's a different consideration. So I guess we're here to get some input. I did get a little something from Mr. Sutcliffe, if I can find it, in all this paper.
So before we move on, I mean, did any members of this board discuss anything? Because as I recall, the subcommittee was tasked to look at some specific towns in particular, and that we had specifically scheduled this meeting so there'd be enough time for that research to be done, and then for that subcommittee to meet. So, did that subcommittee meet, and did anybody look in those towns?
We didn't meet per se. We had some conversations. Well, it was basically Mr. Berman and I, back and forth a bit, and Mr. Berman could speak to it. I know, gosh, where is it? I did get a little bit of, I don't quite know how to proceed in order with this.
Well, let's take it in small pieces.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Berman, Selectman Berman, I mean, did you and the planner and then anybody else call up some towns?
I think we really got to have a discussion as to where we want to go with this. I've talked to Mike Ahern about, the commercial. Do we want to impact fees on commercial businesses, and how do you assess them? I mean, you put a store in on Tenny Mountain Highway, what's the effect of that going to be on the traffic patterns, et cetera, long term? I mean, the problem with Tenny Mountain Highway is it's a cumulative effect. If we could look down the road 10, 15 years from now and see exactly what the impact's going to be of new businesses coming in there, and what the effect will be on the town. I mean, Tenny Mountain's a state highway, so DOT is a major, has major responsibility, plus the fact the developments, such as Lowe's, if they come or would have come.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah, they're prepared to put up significant amount of money to get the immediate area for traffic lights and roundabouts, et cetera. But in addition, you have to deal with things like, we're talking, there's been a lot of discussion about a roundabout at the Smith Bridge Road, all right, which is halfway between the Walmart lights and the ones down here by Hannaford's. And if that's already a problem, because the amount of traffic that's starting to accumulate coming out of Smith Bridge Road and off of Boulder Point, it's just a lot more, there's a lot more traffic. The suicide lane, I think it's probably going to be self-fulfilling if we don't do something about, deal with how we deal with the suicide lane. Do we expand on it, or do we talk about widening the road? And whose responsibility is it?
I think what I've learned since we initiated this conversation before, I think we're going about this in the right way in terms of, commercial development impacts, residential development impacts. However, we have an immediacy right now of an area that is burgeoning with growth and development to the good, which is great, Tenny Mountain Highway, and is creating the kind of stressors and impacts that would come under this category. I would suggest to the board, unless someone has a grand over-scheme already, and that would be wonderful, that at this point right now, we try to concentrate maybe on Tenny Mountain Highway, because I think that's where this is coming to. And if we concentrate on Tenny Mountain Highway with commercial development, and also the possibility of residential development in the ag zone, which through the transportation network feeds into Tenny Mountain Highway because of, the either end connectivity of it, I think you're going to get a template maybe on what direction we want to go in by using this as an example, because it's a reality now, rather than trying to develop a bit of a theoretical template, if you folks understand.
I really think that we've got to deal with residential and commercial separately. And residential, I think, is fairly easy to cope with. If you have an apartment or an apartment complex, we have one that's in the process right now out on in Fairgrounds. What's the impact on the school? You have 32 two-bedroom apartments, average 1 or 2 kids per. All of them are going to be in school. You could be talking 2 extra classrooms and a bus. I mean, that's easy to quantify. And because Plymouth development, the single-family housing development has just never really been a factor, I don't think. I mean, I've been here for 6 years, almost 7, and I don't think the town's grown 100 people outside of the university. But, I've been in towns where developers will come in and they'll say, okay, we're going to put 50, 75 houses on that hill, and they do it. It's not a question of, like where I live, they cut up the lots and then tried to sell them off. These are guys that came in and built houses.
Well, I don't think you're really saying, in a sense, I think you're preaching to the choir, because I think we had this conversation the last time, and that we're all in agreement that both residential and commercial are areas that we want to look at. And I think, to get back to Planner Penny's point about, we don't want to just be theoretical. My understanding is that's why we tasked, the subcommittee to look at very specific places, so it wouldn't just be theory, it would be quite practical. So I don't think we need to go over the old ground of, gee, should we look at impact fees? Because I think the board already said we want to look at it, but we need to see what's out there. Yes, Ms. Bishop?
Yes, I would just like to say, since we don't have any input of other towns, I would take that on, and I will contact 3 towns that do implement that find out where they're coming from, how they go about it, and present it to the board. At this point, I think we should just put it on the table and wait until I can get that information.
I
Give
do,
me 2 weeks.
excuse me, I do have something we can hold off here on, from the town of Bow and the town of Londonderry. And actually, this came up on Plan Link, actually, it's regarding waivers of impact fees with residential development. Of course, they have a lot more going on down there. We do have to be very careful not to be discriminatory, particularly with workforce housing or whatever. I mean, we've got, this has to be applied as we realize, as a formula across the board. So, and I know that our ordinance allows for waivers, so that's something we also need to consider too. That,
Right.
You know, it's just like ZBA, it's for relief, and if the relief is required, then we need a mechanism to provide it.
Right, and I didn't hear Mr.
No.
Selectman Berman mention
No, no.
anything about workforce housing, but,
No.
you know, apartments.
Right, but I just,
No, because apartments, you're talking
Right.
student apartments. You know, if you have a cutoff point, say 3 or more units in an apartment building, there's an impact that they're going to have.
Right.
Even the student housing.
And I think that's a good model to carry over to also the commercial, which is to be non-discriminatory. And if we just focus on Tenny Mountain Highway, I mean, I think that raises the specter of spot zoning.
Well,
And when we're saying, oh, well, let's just zone this area of commercial, there's lots of commercial developments.
right,
that's
but
potentially
I
in
don't mean
town.
that only as it applies to Tenny Mountain High. What I meant to say was it is active development and increasing development out there right now. So as, just kind of a pilot, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't want to use the word experiment because that gives the absolute wrong connotation, but because the transportation corridor out there is so busy, is constrained, is getting another traffic light, I think we might use it perhaps as an exercise to develop our templates, our parameters, and see how it can be applied in other places. And I know I'm focusing specifically right now on transportation, but that, in a lot of cases, is the most immediate impact, and it's the most immediate red flag, if you will, or the most quantitative.
I think I see your point that if we want to sort of feel our way through the process and we could come up with some examples that are commercial, there's probably a good chance that a lot of our examples would come from Tenny Mountain.
That's what I'm saying, and as we know, some of this latest development a little bit got left holding the bag for the cost of the traffic signal because it's cumulative out there. So, no, not strictly as applying this only as spot zoning, but because it is actually happening, and as I said, an increase in traffic is something you'll see immediately.
Well, again, I think you're speaking to a need that the board has already recognized, that I mean, this is happening, and it's time for us to get on the ball. But we don't seem to be on the ball tonight for that. Mr.
Well,
Aaron?
we're floundering a little.
I had emailed Sharon, Mrs. Penny, about the whole concept of impact fees, but we can collect all that information, but it still is only a piece of the puzzle, because we've got property taxes, and if you go through the taxes that are paid to the community, and you go through the book, you look at all the large sums are mostly the businesses that are on Tenny Mountain Highway. They're already paying huge fees to the community, and we're getting that every single year. When we do collect this information, boy, it'd be awfully nice to get some input from them, because they're already paying huge sums of money, and it may not even be developed, and they're paying huge sums of money right now. And I look at our meeting 2-3 months ago, we almost lost a business that was coming to Plymouth because of impact fees. And how many jobs could we have lost because of that? So I think we need that information, but I think that's only we won't be able to make decisions based on just what other towns do unless we find out what their tax rates are, how they're being assessed for property values, whether they have committees in the town that are trying to encourage businesses to come to their community, whether they're giving tax breaks for a year or two for business. We need jobs in this area, and businesses are the ones that are going to hire.
I agree with the last couple examples you gave, but the idea of an impact fee, as I understand it, would actually speak against your first couple examples, that I think we all agree that we all feel like we pay too much in taxes, and that if a business feels extra burdened by that, that when all of a sudden they get told, oh, the town needs to build a new street light, then the tax rate has to go up. That money has to come from somewhere, and it comes from the people who already are there. So now they're paying their already high taxes, and now they have this extra fee to go on. Whereas if you do impact fees, the people who are coming in, the people who have the money and have to take this put this in a calculation of how much it costs to develop or not, and can explain that to their backers, this is what it costs to develop, they bear the cost of that, and that means that the cost of the pre-existing businesses aren't affected. So that means that they don't have to suddenly wonder what's going to happen to their wallet. You're absolutely right that it could have an impact on encouraging development or discouraging it, but that's, if it's part of the business model that's used in America, it makes a lot of sense. And of course, as you very rightfully point out, towns have the ability to waive some of these impact fees if it's decided that it's better to put the burden on the people who already are here than the people who are coming into town. But so I think finding out tax rates of other towns isn't going to be all that beneficial, because tax rates are all relative to what their budgets are. But I think finding out what you pointed out, whether they've been giving waivers, is really key, because that gives us a sense of how effective or ineffective these are. And that's again why I think we need to have some examples. And if I didn't say it earlier, Ms. Bishop, thank you so much for volunteering to do that.
I'll definitely do it. I really want to resolve this. I don't want to see this going around.
Town planner, and then Select Member Berman.
Once again, we can't apply a cookie cutter approach this, which I don't think we are, but with Mr. Ahern's example, a smaller business coming to town, there may be some impacts, but it would not necessarily be of the scale, let's say, as a Lowe's or something like that. And the corporate business model is pretty unilaterally ready or anticipating these kinds of costs of development, because what they're putting into it with the whatever, $100,000 for the traffic light, obviously is coming back because it's a regional commercial center. So I think we have to look at what is coming in, and that's where the waiver process or a proration, a scale of impact fees, without making ourselves totally crazy, would come in, small, medium, large business, how much, generally speaking, traffic generation, just on that small aspect, and we're not even talking water and sewer, or in the case of residential, impacts to emergency services and schools and this and that. But because this area is a pretty good mixed use out there on Tenny Mountain Highway, I thought perhaps for our work effort, we could use that as some sort of classroom, so to speak, to look at things.
Okay, Mr. Berman?
Well, one of the things that occurs to me is we could get into a system similar to the sewer and water. If you put a sewer line down a street that doesn't have sewers, you assess the people on the street. And you could do the same thing, I don't know if you could attempt to do the same thing with the businesses on, let's take Tenny Mountain Highway. You've got to add a light for $500,000, and depending on, you can either use the current tax rate for the building or square footage or number of automobiles that they're permitted to have as the basis for assessing, spreading the cost of this $500,000 light. I mean, that's another way to do it. That's an impact fee that's sort of pay as you go.
I mean, excuse me for interrupting, but this is a corollary I have to catch up on. Because it is a state highway, if there are what they call betterment improvements out there, driveway, closing up the access so it's controlled access driveway, not a million different cuts or this or that, the funding scenarios are a little different because they're not as expensive. So in that case, the town would have a share of it rather than the whole thing. DOT would take over the majority. But when you get, and DOT a lot of times will have some monies for traffic lights and stuff like that. But any transportation improvements to Tenny Mountain Highway are not necessarily all on the shoulders of the town of Plymouth because of the fact we're very lucky in that it is a state highway. So it's an unusual scenario as our test case, but maybe it would be a little more equitable because it is a state highway.
But there are also other aspects that tie into commercial development, such as security issues, that would be regardless of if it was on a state highway or not. If we need to buy more police cars or hire more police officers because we need to make areas more secure, that's an impact fee that
Right,
can be
no, you're
discussed.
right, there are corollaries to that for sure, so.
I'm sure other towns have dealt with this that have
Well,
implemented it already, so it'd be interesting to get their minutes and get it on the table.
Yeah, I think more than interesting, I think it's going to be really, really helpful. Mr.
Absolutely.
Wilson?
That's why I suggested looking at what Tilton has done, because Tilton has seen in the last 20 years some really explosive growth on Route 3, and Route 3 is a state highway.
You're right.
I believe another town that was mentioned was Littleton.
Mhm.
I don't think they have impact fees,
But,
though.
well, and that would be worth knowing.
Right, why not?
We'd have to look back at the minutes, I think, to find out the exact towns that that committee was charged with if we're not.
I think Epping was one we brought up.
That was two of the three, and I
Yeah.
think one of them was
Epping, Charlie mentioned it.
Yeah,
Epping.
Yes, Epping. So, Ms. Bishop, do you feel like
I'll
taking
take
that
it
on?
I will definitely do it.
Okay. A question for the town planner. I mean, not that we have our crystal ball in front of us or in front of you, but can you make a prediction on how the agenda looks for in 2 weeks? Because Ms.
Oh,
Bishop.
it's light because the deadline is passed.
That's
So
right.
I mean, it's busy with Tractor Supply because it's a 1-2 punch, but
What do you mean by a 1-2 punch?
it's a minor subdivision subsequent to a site review.
Okay, so there are two items for Tractor Supply.
They're
Okay.
related.
And Ms. Bishop, I think you said 2 weeks. Do you feel comfortable with that time, with that
They're
window?
cooperating, you know?
Okay.
Littleton.
Would it be
Do
then?
that, you can do that.
Would it be right for me to assume that the mood of the board is that we move this item to the next meeting when Ms. Bishop can make a report? And if they can fax you the stuff or
Yes.
email it to you, maybe we can scan it into PDF files and
Share it
have
prior to.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
You're going to
Absolutely.
commercial only, or?
I'll see what they got, see how they, you deal with it.
And if you wanted to lasso some other people who had already volunteered on the last subcommittee, you should.
I
you should.
said I'll
Take
do
care of
Littleton.
it.
But we're gonna leave you as the chair of that subcommittee, and with all the authority and power that comes with it.
Vested therein.
Yeah. Privileges and honor that come with it.
And I'll second that one.
Yes, Mr. Dragon.
I was not here at the last of the first meeting we had on impact fees, but I was reviewing the minutes here of the board for September 16th. And there were several comments that I thought were very good. One of them, after discussing everything tonight about how we're going about this, are we going to have just one committee, or are we going to have a number? Like, I agree with Mr. Ahern that probably should have just one specific committee to handle, and instead of having separate ones, which they were talking about. Has that been done, or
I
is
think
that
at thi-
where we're heading?
I think
or
at this point, we have one subcommittee.
just one subcommittee that will entail all the...
Yeah, the
Well,
administration of several is.
We'll move from that, from there. We'll grow as is needed.
And I do understand from what we've discussed tonight that we will have information from other towns that have impact fees.
Exactly.
And relative to our situation, and some continuity is with the town and development that's going on at Tenny Mountain, that would be, reasonable. Okay, that's the only comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the other item for new business is to discuss potential zoning amendments for, well, let me just back up one thing. On that first item, why was rotaries put into that
was a
line?
note to
When I was
myself.
reading
That was
it,
a
I
note to myself.
got confused.
As an example, Mr. Berman pointed out, Where Smithbridge Road is coming out now, it's just problematic, as is where the Shell Station is too. That's getting kind of sketchy. But because Fairgrounds Road, you know, the connectivity of these open areas that are somewhat developed with residential houses, residences, and the potential for multifamily or whatever because of the zoning, that would be one site-specific area where a rotary might work, because we certainly can't bear too many more traffic lights on.
Okay, well, now that does sound like another subcommittee or report, and since it's the select board that's in charge of roads, I think that should be an issue that if we're going to take on, that we work hand in hand with the select board.
This is very preliminary. This is just planning. This is just thinking, trying to think ahead, mostly me and our building inspector. We were just kind of putting our heads together. But just noticing in a very non-scientific manner the areas where you can really not make a left-hand turn on Tenny Mountain Highway.
Ms. Bishop?
Yeah, I was gonna, wouldn't it just take a phone call to the state and say, what do you think about this, and why don't they analyze it, and test it, and say, this is what
Oh, they will, but you have to have, the will of the town behind it, because it would become a project on the 10-year plan, on their transportation improvement plan, and we definitely would work with them on it, and they would bear the majority of the costs. But I'm just looking at solution,
Well,
general,
I think
long-term
it's also-
solutions.
those say this would work, this wouldn't work,
Right.
you know, and
Well, I think it might be more, I think what the planner is saying is it's more complex than just a phone call, because there is this idea of working with the select boards. And I think there's also probably in our particular mix, the fact that there were those two roundabouts
Right.
suggested on Tenny Mountain Highway just a few years ago, relatively recently, and that at that time didn't seem to be very popular. That's when Lowe's first was talking about entrance. So you might remember there was talk about 2 or 3 roundabouts down the highway. So there is some sort of history
what
to
I'm
this that's
thinking is
going
that
on.
it's gonna take more of a professional.
Oh, yeah, no, this is planning. This is just thinking, looking ahead, which is my charge, you know, as an employee of the town, and particularly given my background as a transportation planner, to see what some of the problems are, and it was just an idea. It's nothing formal or anything like that, but it would go through DOT for sure.
Mr. Randlett?
I was just going to mention just what you mentioned,
didn't mean to
that we
steal your
had,
thunder.
that we had discussed the rotaries before, and for informational purposes, I think Bill Hool has all the presentations. We had hearings here with DOT and
Right.
everything else, so, I mean, there's a lot of information.
I know there's a lot of
that-
background, and it's worked so well downtown. It's just amazing, and that the three-way intersection.
Well, excellent point, Mr. Randlett.
Yeah.
For relying on Mr. Hool's institutional memory for that. Okay, so then moving on to discussing potential zoning amendments for the town meeting warrant of 2011. That's an item I believe you put on the agenda.
It is, well, the timeframe is upon us, and I believe I notified our chair here and vice chair and their counterparts on the ZBA, because there's a certain protocol to getting any changes to the zoning ordinance on the town warrant for town meeting. Addition of any new zoning ordinances, I haven't heard anything. I mean, this is a case where you folks have been working with Miriam for a couple of years, so I didn't know in terms of institutional memory if there was anything hanging out there. Also, just the housekeeping with zoning ordinances. Let's say if some of the language was fuzzy, or there were definitions that were not clear, or definitions that were not there, or anything like that. I mean, administrative stuff, you know, we can change as a board. I have a few ideas on some protocols for application submission and stuff, but that's clerical stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to let you folks know that it's here somewhere. The time is upon us, so I guess I don't know. I'd be curious to know what everyone's thoughts are on anything that's been out there, unbeknownst to me.
Mr. Ahern?
Over the last 6 months, 8 months or so, we talked about potential changes to the zoning. And we've talked about it amongst the board, and each time we had a change, again recently, it's been kind of shot down as far as changing the zoning at this
You
time.
mean expanding boundaries or contracting or
Yeah,
changing
there was-
uses or?
Right, there was talk about accessory structures, whether we wanted to change the zoning for that. We determined that at this time, we didn't want to touch that. There was probably 2 or 3 other examples that we talked about at that meeting and decided that we wouldn't make any changes at this time. So it's not something that, we have been discussing it throughout the year.
Okay.
And I don't believe there's anything that we really wanted to go to town warrant.
So if there were, if the time frame allowed, if anything, it would be the implementation of protocols and particulars for impact fees, I guess.
What about
right?
the driveway thing? That's an issue
Well-
that's been coming. Have you seen some of these driveways we're talking about?
I went up one.
I mean, I got one that shouldn't be legal, but mine's mild compared to, I mean, we have one up there that
Well, I'll say,
actually broke his ribs or something coming down one morning.
so I'll say that the town planner actually asked me if I, the town planner actually asked me if I wanted to have that item on this meeting agenda, and I felt that 2 things. One was that it sort of raised the specter of the board suddenly at the last minute getting involved in making potentially significant changes to private citizens' rights, property rights, and that my sense from the board was that those issues usually need to be really hashed out before we put them on a warrant article.
Like public hearing.
Yeah, so that we as a board, we want to really get through it before we put it for a public hearing, because it probably had the potential, it seemed to me, to be a hot-button item. And the second reason why I said maybe that wouldn't be right for us to just sort of do it now when we're sort of against the gun, against the end of the timeline, was that I believed that we were going to spend so much time talking about impact fees that it seemed like it was not going to be worth our while to have an extraordinarily long meeting that perhaps wouldn't go anywhere. But obviously, I was wrong about that. But that, I do want you to know, Select Member Berman, that was discussed, and I'm the one who stopped it from going on
I
the
think there's
agenda.
state codes. It'd be like the building code.
I-
You just implement the existing codes.
There are grade percentages that DOT recommends. I think it's an item that this board would do well to address, perhaps not for this warrant article, but I really think we need to, because the master plan and all the underlying statutes speak to development, as proper development. And just as an example, driveways like this, and I'm not trying to disallow anyone of their property rights or anything, but if you can't get a fire truck up, you've just shot yourself in the foot, or whatever, if you come careening down and hit your neighbor's house or your neighbor's child or something. It's not a good land use practice to have, for example, development access through a driveway that's at a 19% grade or something. I mean, it's not safe, it's not good, it creates erosion, blah, 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 blah. But I really think it's something we need to look at as soon as possible and thoroughly with some public input, some public informational hearings and stuff. Because I would hate to see any subsequent developments come in with driveways that look like ski jumps. It's just not a good practice in any manner.
Well, I believe that a single-family house that wants to do a driveway goes to the select board for all their permits, and so that wouldn't come before the planning board.
No, but we can give guidance to, in a subdivision, yes.
The thing is, generally, the rules on driveways for town roads are applied by the
Highway Department,
highway department.
yeah.
I mean, every town I lived in, you had to go to the road agent to get a driveway permit, and if he didn't like what you were doing, you didn't get it. The state controls everything, like on anything on Main Street, north or south, and they've got rules. I mean, you have to have, with a state road, you have to come in at a 90-degree angle. That's a critical issue with. But one of the things I'm concerned about is, there's nothing you can do about the existing driveways. And there's a couple of zingers in town. I mean, I had a ride up one of them.
So did I.
My God. I mean, you're talking a driveway that's 19 or 20% grade, 250 to 300 feet long, ends on one side of a country road, and right across the road is I don't even think there's a guardrail. And there's a house on the downhill slope
Right.
that if you ever went over the edge, you'd land in this guy's second floor. I mean, that's how bad it
No,
is.
seriously, it's like a ski jump. You come right down.
I don't know what we would have done to mitigate that, but I have a feeling it could have been mitigated because your
So-
approach to the road would be.
So if we, as a board, propose that there be a change in our ordinance so that there was a rule and that there was that no grade could be higher than some X number, that would go, the town would then have to vote on it, and then the road agent, before they signed off on any building use permit, would have to say, whoops, you don't make this grade, or you do make the grade.
But I think
Is
codes
that-
already exist to control this sort of thing.
And yeah, I'm not saying that we reinvent the wheel, but what I want to make sure is I understand what you as the select board are asking this board to do in terms of do some research and make a proposal to the town, and put on a town warrant what the law is. That's what,
We, like the building code, where we adopted basically what the town did is adopted the state building code. It was a formal move and I think driveways, there's already codes that could easily be adopted. And as I say, you've got a lot of lots in this town that when they come for permits to build, you're gonna have some
Okay.
really strange approaches to get to that.
So I think we're clear now on what you're asking, and I think a question, I want to recognize some other people who seem to want to speak and not do all this talking, but one of the things we have to ask is it even possible to have this kind of discussion and get something in front of the public for the town meeting?
I don't think so now, for this year, but I would make a recommendation as the planner that we address this next year however we need to. I mean, just put everything out there, see if the select board still wants to be controlling driveway permits. Should that be under the purview of the highway department, so there should be some basic standards? Just, have that public discussion.
Okay. Well, I think it's good then if we're not trying to rush into it then,
I mean, I don't know.
especially since we have
could
this.
start the hearing process. Obviously, you're not going to make it by next year, just to set the hearings up.
And before we do the hearing process, obviously, we want, again, to do some research to see what the state says and
Well,
what some
my
other
suggestion is that the
towns say.
town planner find out what the state codes are as they relate to driveways.
All right. I'd like to recognize Mr. Wilson and Ms. Bishop, who I think both were going to say something here. And then I'd like to get the sort of the mood of the board as to when it would make sense to move forward in this kind of discussion. Mr. Wilson, were you trying to say something?
I was, but in the ensuing conversation, it covered what I was going to say.
I'm sorry if I stepped on your words.
That's fine.
Ms. Bishop?
Yeah, I just want to share, when it comes to driveways, I think, that's private. It's not something that anybody should be driving to unless they're a guest, and their liability holds on to the homeowner. Now, if it's a driveway that's going to be brought into a development at some point, then I think you're going to have to go to some sort of thing. But to give it, you can't build there because the road's just not going to go there, that kind of thing. And they have situations where the liability as far as a fire truck or whatever, let's say if you wanted to build on a 6-class road, you can bring that code up to specs and build on that. But then you're losing liability, you're giving up. You have to give up your rights for that fire department. And if you want to live there on a 6-class road, you can live there, but you have to give up your right.
But Class 6 road is different from a
Driveway, but a driveway a 6-class road is more of a public road, where a driveway is private.
Well,
So
it's
how-
private to the extent that it enters into a town road, and that's where the town's got some concerns.
Mr. Ahern?
Yeah, when I served on the committee, the Building Codes Committee, probably a year ago or so, we talked about adopting the enforcement ability for the town to enforce the state building codes, which they were, we did have to abide by them, but we didn't have the enforcement capability, which the town voted last year, so now we can. When the committee was meeting, we decided on what we were going to specifically look for and have the building inspector, building code person look at. And it was plumbing, electrical. There were certain things that they were going to have to check off as the building was being built. And possibly is just adding one more check of the driveway as it's being put in. And once, and there's little fees for each step of the way, for each inspector to come in. But the town road agent should possibly be involved with that. And that could solve that whole problem very easily. I'm surprised the insurance companies haven't caught up to it yet.
From some of the things I've seen particularly, and I understand what Ms. Bishop is saying. I think my concern is more in subdivisions. I mean, they may be private roads or whatever, but for example, the house that Charlie and I were talking about, if it's icy, that car is going to end up on somebody else's house.
Well, our zoning ordinance says that any road that serves more than two houses has to be a road, not a driveway. Our driveways are defined very specifically. So if we have a subdevelopment of 3 homes or not, it cannot be a driveway, and I think that will take care of that issue.
Yeah.
I do not have a clear sense of how the board feels in terms of moving forward about.
I think if we just have Miriam meet with Brian and talk about whether we can.
Sharon.
Sharon, that's right.
I thought I heard that.
Call me mom.
You just can't get over the loss of marriage,
Yeah,
can you?
if we can have Sharon meet with Brian and maybe we can figure out whether we can change the enforcement procedures for the building, for building permits.
And maybe having in hand what the state regulations are as a sense of
Yeah, I
how
mean,
far off some of our
a lot of
19%
towns have
grays are.
promulgated their town driveway regulations, which are common sense regulations, drainage and not vertical, on DOTs. And DOT suggests a max of 15% grade, so.
I mean, the danger is, the other side of this coin is that if we implement these as town code, you could take a lot of existing lots in subdivisions that have been approved and basically take them off the books because
Yep.
you can't put a driveway in.
Yeah, I know, I had that thought too.
That's a whole different, then you're getting into a whole different discussion. If you own a subdivision of 40 lots, all of a sudden the town obsoletes about 5 of them, you're really going to be upset about it.
Well, if you have a subdivision like that, again, you'd be,
You think?
you would be, I would imagine, grandfathered while the building permits
Could be an
were
expo-
still valid.
Could be an ex post facto law.
But I don't know if you can grandfather a lot that doesn't have a driveway on it. You can
No,
grandfather
yeah,
the
I
driveway.
agree. One lot, you're talking about potentially taking away those owners' rights, current
Right.
rights.
And it's hard to start midstream on this kind of thing. I just think it's a really bad land use pattern to just willy-nilly some of the things I've seen.
Well, I think Select Member Berman also made a very important point about the fact that, if these driveways are on town roads and somebody's driving along and they get hit because the driveway is a slalom chute, there's some traffic safety issues there to seriously consider. All right, so does the board feel like we are ready to say we're finished with the new business? Then we have item number 8, unfinished and other business. Does anybody have any other business or a business that was begun and is unfinished?
No, I just have handouts.
Oh, actually,
but-
all right, that
Yeah.
was in my, I have to admit that I was, stunned when I sat down. I said, this is a lot of reading for me to do, and now I realize that I'm supposed to hand these out. Is that right?
That's
Because
right.
they're all copies. So I guess that's business. So why don't I take a copy and pass these down? We have our planning board meeting schedule.
That's only through the end of this year, but
Through
just because
December.
we've been so all over the place, I thought.
We have well, let me ask the planner. Often these things were mailed to us along with the minutes. Is this a money-saving idea?
No, some of that just came up today. I realized that I hadn't looked at the planning board bylaws, and I didn't know, not that particular piece of
But
information.
I just meant
Some
that-
of it was electronically
What I mean to,
sent.
what I mean to ask is this process of me distributing these pieces of information at the planning board meeting a cost-saving idea of yours as opposed to it being mailed out?
Well, it certainly could be, right? I just.
Okay.
So now, I feel personally when I give it to you, it doesn't get lost. as
Okay.
much, perhaps.
In the spirit of not getting lost, Saturday, November 13th is the annual Fall Planning and Zoning Conference. That's what this says.
Yeah, I guess.
There wasn't enough to go around. It ended right here.
I can get you more.
Two more copies?
Why don't we wait till the end and see
Yeah,
how
I'll
many
get all
copies
kinds of
need to be
copies.
made? Okay, this is actually quite important considering the conversation we almost had today. This is Article 7 of impact fees from our Plymouth subdivision, and then related to that from our ordinance, Article 10, impact fees. So maybe our homework for the next 2 weeks, when Ms. Bishop comes back with these other items, we can be familiar with what is being handed out.
Does everyone have a copy of the current subdivision and site plan regs?
If
I
you
think we
do,
all have them.
You do?
Well, whenever you say current, we always have to ask, well,
Well, the
how
most-
current? If there's something that's been out in the past few months, then we need to know.
No, as of town meeting last year.
Okay.
okay, we
Subdivision
have also,
regulations I have dated November 7th, 2002.
That's apparently the latest update.
okay, also along in the same spirit for our meeting in 2 weeks, from Plan Link, we have some public capital facilities impact fee information.
That's the waivers, those two
That's
towns.
the waiver,
Yeah.
okay. And then finally, are these all our bylaws?
As far as I could
An
discern.
updated printing
It
of the
looked
planning
like
board
it
bylaws?
was to, what does that say, 2007? And you may have these things, I just wasn't sure who had what,
2008.
2008, how current it was.
Get some more of these. Impact.
Yeah, just, if you would, Charlie, if you could just make a pile of what needs to be copied, and I'll run down through that.
All right. So, if I just can have everybody's attention for a second?
Sure. Well, you should make more copies. I won't, I just, so they should make
I
copies.
guess not.
No, but it'll come.
So our next meeting's the 18th. I won't be here.
Okay. So just for everybody's attention for a second, so what you've just been handed. So everybody's attention, please. So what we've just been handed is information that we will be able to use at our meeting in 2 weeks. Ms. Bishop will report about how other towns are using impact fees. We have in our hands some Plan Link information about it, and our own bylaws, from our ordinance and from our subdivision. So then moving on from unfinished and other business, we have time again for public comments. If anybody in the audience would like to make a public comment on any item, you're welcome to do so by identifying yourself now. Seeing none. We're moving on to, I hope he doesn't mind, I always say this, Mr. Ahern's favorite motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
And by acclamation, we are adjourned at 7:37. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I'll get those copies. What do we need?
Celebrating my 50th.
You gonna make them now, Sharon, or you
I
want
am,
to?
no, I'm
I
gonna
can stop by tomorrow or the office.
take